It's the penultimate day. We end tomorrow. Today we have a plenary lecture and we have two contributed papers or presentations. The plenary session is going to be taken by Aaron Sloman from the University of Birmingham. And the title of the talk is Recently Hatched Ideas about Hatching an Intelligence Using Very Low Energy Physics and Chemistry to Normal Temperatures in Egg-Laying Vertebrates. So I'll ask Aaron to take the chair. And the reason you have a sort of strange display on your computer is that he's sharing his desktop with us, not a series of slides. So you get a kind of double effect going on. Don't worry about it. It's just a bit surreal.
Yes, and at the moment I'm just letting it show who's speaking, and so you'll see me because I'm speaking, but I'll move into another mode fairly soon. I just want to say I want to apologize because I've agreed to do this despite knowing that the task is impossible in the time available. But I'll see what happens. Maybe I can plant some seeds in people's minds and then they'll grow and people will come back to me later and so on. But let's go to my webpage for a start, which has a title. Well, you've heard it now. Recently hatched ideas about hatching an intelligence, and then a subtitle, using very low energy physics and chemistry at normal temperatures in egg-laying vertebrates. So you get a clue from that I'm talking about intelligence that's concerned with space. And although I'm focusing on animals, vertebrate animals that lay eggs, I'm really interested in human intelligence and all sorts of other kinds of intelligence. But by narrowing it down, we can isolate some features of the problem that are otherwise obscured by too many other factors. So, and I only thought of doing this, although I've been working on this problem since about 1960, when I was finishing off my DPhil thesis defending Immanuel Kant in Oxford. And I've done many talks and many papers and done things. It was only in October, around October 2020, that I suddenly thought, animals come out of eggs. Many sorts of birds, but not only birds, turtles, alligators, various other things come out of eggs. Not only fully formed physically, they can walk, they can go to their mother, they can feed themselves and so on, but also with surprising amounts of intelligence. They don't have to go and train neural nets in order to work out which foot to move when or how to peck at food. They already have those competences. And that thought had never previously struck me in the way that it did. It somehow was triggered by an event or a remark in a conference I was listening to, as yet another Zoom conference. So after that, I started thinking about eggs and what could happen inside an egg. And the more I thought about it, the more complex the problem got. And you're going to have a taste of some of that journey into increasing complexity that I've been through in the last couple of years. How shall I start? Well, I'll give a tiny bit of background to explain my original motivation. When I was a student studying mathematics in Oxford, I discovered that a lot of people thought that Immanuel Kant's philosophy of mathematics was completely wrong and that David Hume was right. And I had previously read about Kant, partly through Bertrand Russell's book, The History of Western Philosophy, and felt that Immanuel Kant's views corresponded to my experience. But now here's the catch. My experience went back to my days at school when I was taught geometry. We had school teachers who drew diagrams on boards and showed you how you could construct new diagrams with rulers and compasses. The diagrams themselves did not have to be perfect. That was a key point. The things that were drawn represented abstract things which were in our minds that we could think about, and we could learn things from those diagrams. And that was my favorite part of mathematics at that time. Then I went to university, originally planning to do physics, switched into mathematics for various reasons, and then started learning about other kinds of mathematics, which are much more formal, logic-based, and so on. But the geometric mathematics was still there in the background, and I was still interested in it. Then I started meeting philosophers who thought that there was something wrong with the kind of view of Immanuel Kant that I had liked. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up different bits of the history. They thought Immanuel Kant had been refuted by Einstein and Eddington. Einstein's contribution was pointing out that there's a reason to believe that physical space is not Euclidean, therefore wouldn't satisfy Euclidean axioms. And then Eddington in 1919 observed an eclipse of the sun. I'm hoping most people know what happened. By using an eclipse, they could get light from a star coming close to the sun, which would not normally be visible during an eclipse, and compare the position of that star relative to the other stars where there's no eclipse. And then the predicted shift was observed. The star looked a bit further away from the sun during the eclipse because the light was coming close to the sun. Anyway, the details don't matter. The point was that was supposed to show that Einstein's view of space as non-Euclidean, of physical space as non-Euclidean, was correct. And many people then drew the conclusion that Immanuel Kant had been refuted because he thought we could have knowledge about Euclidean geometry that we got by thinking about diagrams and reasoning. We could use rulers and pencils and compasses and so on, but those are just tools, and the precise operation of those was not important. You didn't have to you couldn't have a perfectly thin pencil line anyway. I mean, that's physically impossible, but you could reason about perfectly thin lines and use the physical diagrams to suggest lines of argument. And that had been going on not only for hundreds of years, but for hundreds of years before Euclid and Aristotle and Plato and Pythagoras. Pythagoras' theorem was proved many times long before Pythagoras was born. The theorem was discovered. Anyway, should I click on admit because there's someone in the waiting room? I'll do that. Anyway, so that was part of the background to all of this. I liked geometry. I thought Immanuel Kant had made some deep points about the nature of human geometric knowledge, and they corresponded to my experience as a student in geometry. And now I was encountered by lots of people saying Kant's been refuted by Einstein and Eddington, and the education of young kids in schools changed for the worst in most countries in the world. Instead of learning to do geometry the way that I had been doing, they might learn a bit of it, but mostly they were taught set theory and logic. And then if they got into geometry, it was done in a purely axiomatic way. Here are some actions for geometry, and then this is what you can derive from those actions using the logic that you've already learned. And that's not how the original geometry was discovered. They didn't start from axioms. The axioms were abstracted from the discoveries. Anyway, that's background. And I will just give you a little example, which I like because it's a theorem that is normally proved by using a diagram that's either made up like this or bits of this. Name the theorem says that if you have a triangle ABC, the three internal angles A, B, and C add up to 180 degrees, namely a straight line. And there are various ways of proving it, standard ways, but they all involve parallel lines. One way is to draw a parallel line over there, parallel to this, and then you show that these three angles are parallel to these three, add up to the same as that angle, that angle, that angle, because this angle corresponds to that angle because of the parallel lines and so on. I don't want to go through all the tedious details. The point is, this made use of axioms of Euclidean geometry, and you can do it in various different ways. But a former student who had been doing philosophy and maths at Birmingham University, became a school teacher. Her name was Mary Pardo. One day knocked on my door and asked me if she could have a chat. I was pleased to see her, and I asked her what she wanted to talk about. And she told me that she had found that her students found this proof difficult to understand. So she had come up with another proof, and she wanted to know if it was okay. So I will now show you Mary's proof. If I can, I think the easiest way is to just do it with a pencil. Mary's proof said, if you want to prove that three angles of a triangle add up to a straight line, put a pencil on one of the sides of the triangle, then rotate it through one of the angles, and then rotate it through the second angle to get to the third side, and then rotate it to the final angle to get to the original side. And no matter what the shape of the triangle, you can see that that process will go through one angle, another angle, and end up where it's started. So the whole rotation of the pencil is 180 degrees. And I thought that was a wonderful proof, even though it wasn't in any of the textbooks I'd encountered. I later reported that to a mailing list on Foundations of Mathematics, and the people there were split. Some thought it was a nice new proof. Some thought it was not a valid proof for whatever reasons. We needn't go into that. And I later then discovered, someone wrote to me after I put the website on about this, that Mary wasn't the first person to discover that proof. It had been discovered by, I think, a French or Italian mathematician a couple of 100 years earlier, and it generated a lot of controversy. Anyway, that to me is an illustration of real mathematical discovery using space to reason about space. And there's an awful lot of that you can find online on the internet. And there are many brilliant lectures showing how you can prove things. But that's the end of that for now, because I have to now go on to what this has to do with brains and eggs and so on. Part of my problem is remembering the sequence in which I've prepared things. So let's go back to the talk. So that was a debate between Hume and Kant, and I thought Kant was right. David Hume has essentially claimed there are only two kinds of knowledge, namely knowledge that comes from logic and definitions, which Kant called analytic, and then the rest is empirical. And the only way you could discover the truth or falsity of empirical claims was to go and examine the world. And Kant was saying, no, there's three kinds, and Hume hadn't noticed that. Now, I suspect that if Hume and Kant had had a conversation, Hume would have agreed with Kant and said, yes, of course, I've learned all that stuff, and I just wasn't thinking about it when I made my claim about two kinds of knowledge, because the second kind, which is not empirical, I should have pointed out, as you have, breaks down into two subcategories. Anyway, that's Kant and Hume. Now, I've thought that for a long time that the ancient human abilities to make these mathematical discoveries were somehow related to biological capabilities, which are shared with many intelligent species. And some of that is something that I'm going to talk about in a strange way. Oh, by the way, one of the key points I need to point out is that the phenomena that I'm talking about, the discoveries that I'm talking about, cannot come out of the operation of neural networks, which collect a lot of statistical data and then derive probabilities. Why not? Because when you make these mathematical discoveries, you're discovering that something is impossible or that it has to be the case. It's necessarily true. You may also make statistical discoveries in mathematics. That's just a sub-branch of mathematics. But the statistic-based neural networks there are complications and qualifications I should put in, because there are hybrid neural networks which wouldn't probably be covered precisely by what I'm saying. But the paradigm is that the core paradigm of neural networks is they collect a lot of statistical data and then they derive probabilities. And I'm saying out of that, you will never get the ancient kind of mathematical knowledge. You will get something different. So they're constitutionally incapable of explaining the forms of spatial cognition that ancient mathematicians have, and which I believe many other animals also have, and they use it in their interactions with the environment. And I think the next thing I should show you is some birds. The question is, where have I put them? I think I've put them, yeah. So last year, around June, the BBC have a program every year called Spring Watch, and they have wonderful people with wonderful apparatus recording behaviors of many kinds of animals in many different environments, and a lot of them involve birds because they're so fascinating and so varied. And last June, they were showing some avocets. That's an avocet you see on my screen, who had recently hatched, and then when coming out, they walked around a bit, they'd been with their mother, and then at one point, the mother went in one direction, and the young birds went in the opposite direction to some water and started paddling. And I said, oh, I wish I had a video of that. My wife said, freeze the video, freeze the television, get your camera out, go back and take a video of the portion you wanted, which I did. So I'm now going to show you without any sound, because I'll tell you what's going on, what I captured on the screen. So that's a mother avocet, and those are some newly hatched and some not yet hatched ones. And then slightly later, we see her again, and I don't know exactly what's going on there, but there are these 4 hatchlings. She goes left, they go right, they go to the water. And then they start walking into the water, and now you see them paddling around, pecking and feeding themselves. And this is, I presume, very shortly after they had hatched. I mean, I've known for years, and probably many people have known, that when chicks come out of eggs, they can do things. They can go and walk and so on. But it's not only chicks, there are many species. And I'm now focusing on vertebrate species, because there are other things that use eggs and all kinds of things that are interestingly different. And so everything I say about eggs now is about vertebrates. And that includes a whole lot of reptiles and birds and other things, snakes of various sorts. Well, they're reptiles. So the question is, what could go on inside eggs to enable their brains to have these competences when they come out of the eggs almost immediately, if not in a fraction of a second after coming out, very shortly after, and without having to go through a long, tedious process of training their brains using statistics and deriving probability. So that's the question: how could it work? And the suggestion, which is in its way totally wild, is that evolution had discovered ways of solving problems, which it fed into ancestors, or it allowed ancestors of these animals to discover, and mechanisms in eggs allowed discoveries made by ancestors to be, and the original discoveries might have been made slowly, tediously, lots of trial and error, lots of statistical learning or whatever, but it's somehow what had been learned got encoded in the genome, and that raised the question, how is it encoded, and how is the information put into the brain of or put into somehow the space occupied by a new animal that's developing inside an egg. And I will try to show you some ideas which have been developing in the last year and a half and accelerating in the last 6 months, expanding on that idea, because it's very complicated. There's still a lot that's very speculative, and it may be that it's all completely wrong, in which case I hope people who know why it's wrong will tell me, and then we can find a better theory. So the next question is, what do I do next? I had something prepared. I think I've said all that. Right. Skip to the Evo-Devo diagrams below. So I'm now going to try to summarize the ideas that I've been thinking about over the last 2 years, and especially in the last 6 months, which are really very complicated and hard to explain. And I'm going to use a few diagrams. In my previous talks, I collapsed all the diagrams into one. So if anyone's here who's seen this before, you'll see a difference. So this is a diagram. The idea for this diagram came from Susan Stepney. I don't know if she's here today, but she's in the University of York, and we've known each other for a long time, and she's heard me talk, and we've interacted. But anyway, she heard of an early version of this theory and came up with the idea that it could be represented in a 2D diagram. And she did a very crude pencil sketch, and I took her idea and then enriched it in many ways. So this is the latest version of Susan's idea. So we have an abstract screen of a space of possibilities for change in a biological organism. And one dimension of change is evolution across generations of species. And another dimension of change is development of an individual. And what's going to happen is that the development of the individual changes will be changed by the evolutionary changes. So we have changes in evolution, changes in development. And that's what I'm going to talk about for a while. So in the early days, this is very schematic, very abstract, and almost certainly wrong in detail. At some point in evolution of vertebrate egg-laying species, and that in itself is only a tiny sub-branch of the whole huge space of biological species, about which Lynn Margulis writes wonderfully, if you know her work. Anyways, so this is partly inspired by her, but I don't know that she would agree with any of this. But so in the space, in the early days, there was at some point a simple, relatively simple kind of egg cell for a relatively simple kind of organism, which went through a hatching process in the egg, and then somehow that produced a new organism that continued growing when it came out of the egg, and that produced adults, and then adults could be male and female. And this is absolutely crucial. Everything I say today depends on sexual reproduction. There's some of them male, some female, and then some of them would mate, and then inside female, a new eggs would be produced, and then those eggs would go through some internal processes, and then something would be born, and then cycle would continue. So that's a process of development at an early stage of evolution. Now we go down to figure B, and I've introduced, after a jump, a later stage of evolution, and I'm going to talk about some of the changes that might have occurred there. So at these later stages, what I'm suggesting is that the more evolved species of egg-laying animal went through more complicated stages of development, which corresponded to, which had intermediate stages that corresponded to previous stages of evolution. So we have something that in the genome, when the egg starts hatching, the DNA starts subdividing and so on, we get some little creature beginning to form inside the egg. And in this, and then that hatches, and then you get something walking around as of there. But in later stages, instead of the thing stopping at that point, it continues developing inside the egg to something more complicated. And VM is a label for virtual machine. Something is controlling, virtual machinery is controlling the chemical reassembly processes that are producing the physiological structures and all the mechanisms that are required for this thing eventually to go through the stages, including maybe more than one level of virtual machinery you're controlling, goes through various stages of building physiological structures and other things which enable it to come out of the egg and then start acting in the environment in a relatively competent way. And then at a still later stage, we have a much more complicated species where in the fairly early stages, something more complex comes starts operating, and it goes through more complex layers of this versions of the sorts of things I've been talking about, namely constructions inside the egg, including constructions that are producing new constructions in the egg, which start developing new features, it could be new skeletal structures, new muscular structures, and also new evolving gene expression structures, so new recently evolved gene expression structures, which produce yet more complexity in, say, the current versions of the species. Now, that is very abstract, very schematic, and it would really need to be cashed out in terms of real biochemistry based on research that I'm not in a position to do. I don't have the resources, but I think there are many fragments already being done by researchers all over the planet studying various processes that go on in eggs and during the hatching process. And there are, if you go online and look for, search for information about eggs and hatching, you'll find that there are quite a lot of pictures. I don't know if I've got some here. Anyway, the main point I want to make is there are a lot of pictures showing different stages of development of a cross-section, say, of a chicken or a duck as during the hatching process. And those images and the commentaries cannot show you anything about the processes that are assembling the processes that are assembling the I clicked on a star by accident and I've done something else by accident. Anyway, those processes that go on inside that are shown by photographs taken by cutting open eggs where the fetuses are different stages of development. They don't show you the real intricate detail of the assembly that's been going on. All the blood vessels, all the nerve fibers, and the blood vessels are of different sorts. They're the veins being developed, which take stuff back to the heart and lung, the arteries, which will, well, as they begin to function, will be bringing blood pumped from the heart and out into various parts of the organism. Then there are the capillary vessels where the arteries subdivide and go into all sorts of physiological structures. And there they meet capillary vessels which are connected to the veins, which are going to take the byproducts of the interactions of the blood coming through the arteries with the environment. And there'll be byproducts like carbon dioxide and waste products and so on, which the veins collect and carry back. That's very intricate stuff. And all of that is going at the same time as there are nerve fibers all of that is being developed at the same time as there are nerve fibers being developed. There are tendons being developed. There are bone structures being developed. There are muscles being developed. And I could go on, all the parts of the digestive system and so on. All of these things are growing in parallel. And this is supposed to represent how some of the extra complexity at different stages in the development has to be controlled by more complex controlling virtual machinery. And I say it's virtual machinery because there's no space inside the eggs for all sorts of levers and arms and mechanical devices to come in and manipulate things. It has to be done perhaps by using electrical or electromagnetic fields or something like that, that doesn't occupy space in competition with the chemical structures and all the other things that are being built by the process. So the idea then is that evolution discovered ways of producing at later stages of development in species that reproduce using eggs. And again, I'm only talking about vertebrates here. It discovered ways of getting out of the genome at different stages, not only different information about what has to be in the developing organism, but also information about what kind of control system is required to coordinate and control the later stages of development, because the problems in the later stages will be more complex, more intricate than the problems of control in the earlier stages, when you've already got a lot of stuff developed, and then you now have to add more things, the control problems are different. So, and the abilities to do that controlling had to evolve and somehow get into the genome of the egg and then somehow be expressed. So that's the collection of ideas that I've been trying to present in talks in the last few months to various people, with the talks gradually getting wilder and more complex. And the hunch is that some of the spatial intelligence that was originally required for assembling complex structures inside developing organisms somehow got reused as spatial intelligence for acting and in an external environment and manipulating objects in the environment. So the conjecture is that evolution produced mechanisms for manipulating bits of biological evolutions which are being assembled and have to satisfy a whole variety of changing spatial relationships during the assembly. And out of that process came abilities that were later transferred to abilities to control and manipulate objects outside the organism. That's the conjecture. Of course, there would have to be a whole lot of intermediate stages and many questions answered about how that happened. And then I add to all of that the conjecture that our ancestors, who started not only doing what many other animals do, namely moving objects around, thinking about how to move them, working out good ways of moving them, started noticing that they could abstract away from the actual objects that were being moved and just talk about the spatial structures and what the consequences are. For example, if you have something long and thin and you have something else that's long and thin, and then you move them in relation to each other in some way. And out of all of that, over hundreds or maybe thousands of years of human evolution, I don't know enough about the history, there developed a tradition in many, I think, in different parts of the planet, because I don't think this just happened in one place. It happened in various places in ancient Babylon, ancient India, ancient China, in addition to Egypt and Greece and places in Europe and so on. So those things led to the discoveries that we now know as geometry, but Euclidean geometry is only a subset of that. For example, there are things that Euclid did not include, which are now we're now familiar with. For instance, Euclid did not include reasoning about lines. As far as I know, Euclid didn't say anything about reasoning about lines moving around on the surface of an egg. He talks about straight lines on or curved lines on a planar surface. But we can reason about more things than that. And if I ask you to think about a car tire, or tube rather, so you have a tube with a hole in the middle, and if I left you alone for a while to think about how many different kinds of continuous closed curves could you draw on such a tube. You can draw a little curve on the part of the surface of the tube, or you can go round the outside of the tube, or you can go around more than once. And if I left you to think about that, you might come up with an interesting answer to the question. How many different sorts of lines are there? When I say they're different sorts, lines that cannot be continuously changed into other lines because they're in a different class. You may make an interesting discovery, and I leave that for you to do in the bath or sometime later. But when humans are doing that kind of thing, at least the humans like me and the ancient mathematicians and many others that I've met, they are not doing what many current mathematical theorists do, which is try to capture all those notions in sets of axioms and definitions based on logic, and then show how all the conclusions can be reached by logical deduction. That's not what the ancients do. That's not what I learned to do at school. And although one can try to build a logic-based model of these ancient forms of reasoning, and that's a lot of that has been done, that's a different activity. And that is not what ancient people were using. So I'm now trying to make a lot of claims about a lot of different things, including bad features of our educational system. Sometimes on occasions like this, when it's real life, I ask people to put up their hands if they were taught geometry at school using the ability to prove things by drawing lines and so on. But I can't do that easily now. Maybe later we can find a way of taking a vote at some later stage. Anyway, where have I got to? Let's go back to this thing. So part of what I'm asking is whether the assembly machinery inside the egg that controls all those processes that I was talking about is something like a Maxwell demon, in the sense that, I don't know if you all are familiar with Maxwell's idea, was that in connection with the second law of thermodynamics, which said that disorder can only increase if you have things moving around in space and so on. And Maxwell postulated two boxes connected with a hole which could be opened or shut by a demon that was observing molecules bouncing around the boxes. And he thought, well, if the demon noticed a fast-moving molecule going from left to right in the left-hand box, it opened the door, let the molecules through, and then shut the door. And likewise, if he saw a slow-moving molecule going from right to left, he'd open the door to let it through. But for other molecules, he'd leave the door shut and they'd bounce around instead. And that way, he suggested, without using any energy, if the door is opened and shut without friction, without using any energy, you'd be able to separate a collection of molecules in these two spaces into fast-moving and slow-moving, and that would violate the second law of thermodynamics. And there are various discussions of that and about fallacies and so on. And what I'm suggesting is that the processes that I'm talking about are a bit like Maxwell's demon. They are sitting there inside a very messy, unordered collection of molecules in the egg to start with, the white of the egg and the yolk of the egg and a few membranes, but it's pretty disordered. And out of all the processes that I'm talking about, one of the major results is that those molecules are completely rearranged, or the atoms and molecules, some of the molecules may have to be decomposed, are rearranged in a highly structured way, which puts Maxwell's demons task completely in the shade, because this is far more intricate, far more complex. And the question then is, does this, if it happens in something like the kind of way that I'm talking about, require some kind of, involve some violation of current fundamental physics of thermodynamics? Or is there some way of accommodating this? And I've been talking to physicist friends. I have an old former colleague from student days and so on, Tony Leggett, who hasn't yet said to me, you're talking nonsense, but he hasn't yet said to me, yes, this is plausible as a counter to the second law of thermodynamics. But I don't think he was able to join us today. I haven't seen him in the participants, but I would like to thank him for at least encouraging me to continue with this. And I'm be very grateful if anyone in this audience who has any ideas about this also joins in. And at that point, I think I should stop. I've got a lot of other stuff, but I could go on for far too long. Have I reached my time?
No, that's very good. This gives us a nice amount of time for questions. So thank you very much.
Okay, so should I stop sharing?
Yes, I think so.
Let's try that.
That's
and then
good.
I'll go back. Yeah.
And then you suggested the nice exercise of asking people how many of you have learned Euclidean geometry, using pencils and chalkboards and things like that. What we could do is ask people to go to the reactions and press the check button. There's a little check mark or an X.
Or raise a hand. And then I come up in all the galleries.
Well, we can't see everybody. Okay. So if they do the reaction of the check mark, then I can count very quickly.
Okay, so I'll click that.
So the question is, how many of you have learned Euclidean geometry in the more traditional way, where you have to take out your pencil and
so go down to the reactions box and tick yes if you did. So I'm not the only one. I'm delighted to hear that.
So it's approximately half and half. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
I'm just cycling through them. Oh, Mike Fredrickson. So a couple of names I know from my other contexts. Good.
Yeah. So it's about half and half. Half of your audience. Okay, so we'll now open up the floor to questions.
And criticisms and comments.
But Fawzat has a question.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you for the talk, Aaron. Wide-ranging and, as you mentioned, a wild ride, and I'm sure becoming wilder as it goes. I'm wondering whether you're familiar with recent research on the concept of the engram, E-N-G-R-A-M.
It's a name I've heard, which is supposed to be something in the genome that encodes information. Is that right?
It's an epigenetic concept. It goes back. I'll put it all in chat in a moment. It goes back to Richard, I think Semin back in 1904. Then it gets updated about 10 years ago with neurobiological and biochemical rigor. And this is about 10 years of mainstream attention to this, with titles like epigenetic programming, and let's see, transgenerational inheritance. These are other terms. Neuroepigenetic studies are being done recently with measurements of biochemical precision. And what these have focused on is the passage of memory and learning and skills of the type you're talking about transgenerationally. At this point, they've been able to measure and actually intervene in passing on of learning that a mother does to her chicks in one generation for certain, and a little bit faded, but in the second generation, in the grandchild of the mother, the same fear response to a particular frequency of sound has been demonstrated. And these are published in journals like Nature and so forth. So it's not exactly starting from the geometric basis that you've been talking about, but it does follow the same through line conceptually about how learning could be passed on. And this is not my field. I just have been interested in it a long time, and was happy to see that some degree of precision has been brought to bear on it in a scientific, which is to say, in a neurobiological context. And the fellow who's been convening meetings about this, I think maybe 6 years of this, is John Bickel. I'll just hit chat now. I just dumped this all into chat.
Okay, right.
John Bickel has convened several meetings annually at the University of, I think, Mississippi, down in the Gulf of Mexico area of the United States. And a huge number of papers have come out. I put in a couple of samples. They're not necessarily representative, but you can see where that's going. Anyway, that's all consistent with the kind of things you're saying, but really coming at it from the biochemical and neurobiological point of view. And I was surprised. I was very pleased, because where I learned about this was Waddington, a student of Whitehead, a biologist, early 20th century, and then in other places which use this in other contexts, but I'd never seen it actually played out in a biochemical context. Anyway, there it is. Just wanted to know if you were aware of this, and if not, perhaps you would benefit from and enjoy reading these things.
Well, thank you very much. I've just copied your chat text into a file, which I may use later. But anyway, I knew some of that, and there's a lot of stuff that I used to know, and my brain's been going downhill. Unfortunately, it's often happens at my age, 85, and all kinds of little things are slipping away. Although for some reason I'm still able to have complex new ideas. I don't understand the combination of those two.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say was that what I've been focusing on in the last year and a half is not that fact, which as you point out, had been all the claims, those claims, and there are evidence supporting many of those claims. But I'm focusing now on the mechanisms, and partly because I suspect that there are things that go on in the brains of adult human mathematicians solving problems in geometry of the kind that I used to enjoy so much when I was at school. And I'm not the only one, many other people did, but which are no longer taught to our kids, which is dreadful. By the way, another person who thinks it's who thought it was dreadful was the inventor of fractals, Mandelbrot. He was a great geometer, and I heard him give a talk, I think around about 1993 or something, or I can't remember when it was. Might have been the beginning of the century at Warwick University. And one of his repeated themes is that our kids are not getting the proper education in geometry in school now, because they're instead taught logic and set theory and stuff, use of axioms, and not the ancient forms of reasoning. But anyway, the point I was going to make was I've been aware of those ideas, but I've got interested in trying to understand the mechanisms, because I think the mechanisms may be relevant to deep mistakes in current theories of intelligence, including, on the one hand, the people who say that it's all neural nets, and neural nets have to be trained by a lot of statistical evidence and then you derive probabilities, the brain derives probabilities from those statistics, and then the probabilities are used. And that can never lead to a discovery that something's impossible or necessarily true. No amount of statistical evidence will show that something's impossible or necessarily the case. Impossible isn't a point on a scale of probabilities. It's in a different space altogether. Anyway, so I want to try to change or revive an older form of mathematical philosophy of mathematics, which in turn would feed into mathematical education, which has got huge gaps now. And I think the stuff about n-grams may be relevant to that, but it doesn't directly address the spatial reasoning bit. And as a side effect of that interest of mine, it wasn't something I originally expected when I got into thinking about eggs and so on. I came up with this notion that there might actually be a problem for fundamental physics in explaining the mechanisms that I'm talking about. If my crude analogy with Maxwell's demon is correct, namely that this thing is turning a relatively, the processes in an egg are turning a relatively unordered collection of chemicals in the goo in the egg. I mean, it's not totally unordered, but there's nothing like the structures that emerge a few weeks later with masses of intricate detail. And it's not just, a lot of different things in different places. They're interlocking and interconnected in all sorts of rich ways that seem to require kind of transfer of information about what's going on at different places in order to control what happens next. Anyway,
out on there, two other questioners, so maybe we should let them ask their question.
Yes, Gustavo. Yes.
Gustavo.
Well, Aaron, I must admit I understood little about your presentation.
I'm sorry,
anyway, I have two questions that
I need to
perhaps regard just some preliminary aspects of your thesis. And one is, you claim that during evolution, a growing number of virtual machines has developed. I don't understand why you call these virtual. I understand that the number of machinery increases, but why are they virtual? Or do you call virtual any biological machine that is a mix of chemicals and structures? The second question is, why do you center your talk about hatching? So do you think hatching is a very special phenomenon in life, or it is just one and there are other transitions that must be explained? Think, for instance, the metamorphosis from a caterpillar to a butterfly.
Did you understand the questions?
I think so. I found the volume level a bit low, but I then managed to get it. On the first point, I think the thing that interests me is that, well, perhaps maybe you should make sure I've got this right. You're saying that there's no special reason for emphasizing chemistry or for emphasizing eggs. These are more general phenomena that other people have talked about.
It was more on the moment of hatching. Is the moment of hatching is it one of many phases, or is it a very particular, the biggest change in
it's just that it's an example about which I was able to collect some interesting evidence, and I'm sure that if we look closely at behaviors of many species, things that I know about orangutans and chimpanzees and chickens and ducks and young humans, I wonder. I had a video of a child with a pencil doing things which to me were quite spectacular, but I won't bother with the video. But so there's lots of evidence of forms of spatial intelligence in humans and other species that are all relevant. But I'm also trying to understand what the mechanisms are that underpin those forms of spatial intelligence. And there are some people who think, oh, well, we just use logic all the time. I don't think you are claiming that. And I presume the people you're referring to weren't claiming that. So in that sense, there's no disagreement. It's just, I want to know what the mechanisms are. And I want to be able to understand whether we have the resources in artificial intelligence to replicate them. At the moment, I don't think we do have those resources because we have a combination of fake neural networks, mostly simulated, or in some cases maybe physiological ones, and then logic and algebra. And I don't think either of those two together can replicate the ancient forms of reasoning that I was talking about. And that raises the question, well, is there any way in which we can build machines other than by making more animals or more humans that can do those ancient kinds of reasoning? And I don't know the answer to that. I suspect the only ways that are possible are the ones that evolution has already discovered. And that would be interesting if true. But I think that was only one of your questions. And there was a second one.
The other one was about why call them virtual machines?
Oh, yes. That's
virtual.
right. I'm using the word virtual in the way in which it's been used gradually, more and more generally in computer science since around the early 1960s. Originally, when the thing that was called a virtual machine was a program running on one computer simulating a future possible computer that was going to be built and hadn't yet been built. And then later, more and more complex things happened on computers that did not involve being restricted to particular bits of mechanism inside the computer, particular locations. For instance, a process in a computer could sometimes be occupying one part of the computer physical memory, sometimes another part, or it could temporarily be moved to the disk and so on. And that got more and more complicated. And then later on, we started putting lots of computers together and processes came into existence that weren't located in any of the computers. And the Zoom process that we're all using now brings a whole lot of people together with a whole lot of connections. And there are no wires joining us to, person to person. There are no fixed connections. There are very active, highly complex things going on with signals being communicated and checked. And if there are failures, then corrective actions being taken. So the actual Zoom meeting that we're all sharing is a virtual machine whose implementation may be changing all the time in the physical world without our being aware of that at all. And of course, it changes if someone joins the group or leaves the group. So that notion of virtual machinery seems to me to be deeply important and not part of our normal education. And even computer scientists haven't understood how broad and deep the concept of virtual machine is that we now use in our everyday life. And I'm suggesting that some aspects of that kind of virtual machinery were discovered long ago by biological evolution, insofar as it could not use physical spatial manipulators to change things around in an egg. It had to do it in some other way by changing electric fields or whatever enables the controlling processes in eggs to move chemicals around. Does that sound like an answer to your question? Or
Thank you. Thank you for your explanation. I need to read more to understand something about that. Thank you very much for your explanation.
Well, we could come back to it later in discussion if other people are interested.
Okay, thank you. Xavier has a question.
Thank you very much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. It was very interesting. So mainly, I was thinking a little bit about, well, you explained now Euclidean mathematics in this case, but I am going more to language learning. And I don't know if maybe it's kind of a good comparison, because Chomsky said mainly that when we are born, we don't learn language, but we have mechanisms that actually made us understand the context of language where we learn. And we tend with years to forget how to learn other language because of the adaptations of the neurons. In that sense, I was thinking that perhaps the neural networks that we are using now in artificial intelligence are not good at all, but there are another models at least, which are, for example, the Hopfield networks, which I think that they are not statistical at all. So I was thinking that maybe using this kind of networks and understanding Chomsky's formulations can bring us a little bit to what you suggest with Euclidean mathematics or something like that. So thank you.
Thank you. Language learning and development is a very interesting problem, and I have done a lot of work on that, and some of it has been in collaboration with a biologist at Birmingham University, Jackie Chappell. And we don't agree with Chomsky, and we don't agree with Chomsky's critics. We think that the situation is more complex than most people have realized. And I can try to give a very crude summary of the kind of view that Jackie and I developed, which is that there are aspects of a genome, and this doesn't only apply to language, it applies to various things, but it's absolutely crucial for language, that are what we call meta-configured. That's to say the genome has things that are not fully specified, they're abstract, but they're not all the parts of the genome are expressed at the same time. Now that is very obvious. For instance, there are many parts of the human genome that involve production of sexual physiological changes and changes in motivation, getting interested in the opposite sex and so on. And those happen relatively late in life. So it's clear that the genome, biological genomes have mechanisms for delaying gene expression. And those are examples. And there are many more. Now, what we came up with was the idea that some of those delay mechanisms make use of not specific genomes or genomic structures, which when they're expressed do something specific, but the genome having things that are expressed late, which are abstract. They have parameters, slots for parameters in them. And why is that important? Well, it means that if one of these genetic factors is expressed, say, when you're 5 years old, it may have access to information that the child has picked up in the first 5 years and stored in its memory and so on, which it would not have had in another culture or another time in human evolutionary social history. So that means that the late developing genome can use information that's relevant to a new complex situation that might not have existed in an earlier, for earlier generations, and then do things with that. And if that happens with several levels of abstraction, then you can find ways in which social and other developments, physical techniques, physical technologies, social practices, and all kinds of things that can vary from one place to another, which are themselves products of older people whose genes have been expressed and given them competences, and then they do things, and sometimes they do new things. The children growing up in that environment.
Sorry to interrupt, but Safia also has a question, and we're going to run out of time.
The main thing is the meta-configured genome can produce enormously varied and enormously powerful new phenomena from generation to generation. And I think that I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just taking what I think you were saying to some further implications.
So let's hear the question from Sophia.
Thank you for the talk. I may be asking actually a very naive question, but it's specifically with respect to a virtual machine. I was wondering, what is the difference between virtual machine and causal mechanism? I mean, why we are assuming that egg before hatching or before whatever is happening in that egg is actually completely chaotic? Why we are assuming that? Because isn't it that we have causal mechanisms which can actually explain all those different aspects? And by causal mechanism, I do not mean something which is very deterministic. Rather, it is it's something which has a certain flexibility in itself. I don't know if I'm making sense.
I think I'm saying the same thing as you are, and I'm trying to relate it to mechanisms that provide the flexibility. So one of the ways in which a mechanism can provide flexibility is to be parameterized. And to vary according to the way it works, according to the circumstances. The circumstances provide parameters, which are then used in the way the mechanism behaves. And that's clear in the case of what I was saying about language. But I think that's a much more general phenomenon.
But then what is the why we call it Maxwell's demon?
So why do we call them?
Maxwell's demon.
Well, the Maxwell's demon bit comes from the fact that there is there's some sort of control going on inside the egg, which is manipulating or controlling what happens next at different stages, but that can't be done by something. Well, there are two aspects there. One is, why is that a virtual machine? It can't be done by putting in physical devices that go into the different parts of the egg and push things around. It has to be done in a different way. And by using virtual machines, I include using electromagnetic fields to cause things to move. But they have to be very precise. If you want to continue the development of a nerve fiber in a particular location, or make sure that two blood vessels, a vein and an artery, are going to meet in a particular place, that has to require quite precise control. But the egg controller can't be something that sends in new physical bits of machinery to move these things together. It has
I'm afraid I'm gonna have to cut you off, and
Okay.
Thank you for a very, very nice talk. And maybe during the break you can elaborate on this with Safia, etc.
I'm happy to.
Thank you very much. And hold on, Andrea, maybe you would like to show your slides on the.
Okay, can anyone see the presentation?
Yes,
Okay.
perfect. So I'd now we move to our first invited speaker for the day, which is Andrea de los Angeles Blendini.
Yeah.
Blendini, I'm sorry, from the National University of Patagonia, San Juan Bosco. And she will be talking about the Chinese writing system and the periodic table of symbols.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm very glad to be here, and Adam's talk was very interesting for me because I'm interested in languages as well as chemistry. So today I will try to gather and share with you some thoughts about the Chinese writing system and the periodic table symbols in a way to captivate students' attention when we are teaching the elements, the symbols of the elements in Spanish in our case, in English in other countries. For that, I prepare a list of stepping stones that we are going to go over. We are going to start, as I like to start my classes with my high school students, playing a little game. Due to the lack of time during the presentations, I will just challenge you, and you're going to play by yourself, and then we're going to reveal the answers, okay? Then we're going to compare the writing systems in Chinese, and the Western way of naming the elements. We are also going to recall or talk about a little on how chemistry is a language, and some characteristics that chemistry has as a language. We are going to also talk about some processes in transferring information from short memory or working memory to the long-term memory. And to finish the presentation, I will try to give you my reasons, what I think, why teaching chemical elements in Chinese is useful as a pedagogic strategy when teaching high school students. I will give you some, okay, I need to use this one. I will give you a couple of seconds for you to check the symbols here. If anyone knows Chinese, it's gonna be easy. If not, it will be very fun for me. But what I will ask of you is that you try to find something that they have in common. Okay, they have some elements in common, and I would like you to take a look and answer to yourself if you were able to find the things that are common to several of the symbols.
Right now? Right now?
Yes, right now.
Okay.
Don't give me the answer. I'll just give the slide a couple of seconds. Let's say 15. So you can take a look.
Something to say about that if you want to.
Okay.
Well, I can see that in some of them, there is in the left part of the character, the Chinese character, there is a two-member character, which means has the notion of metallic, right? That's the meaning in general, and in the first one, second, and last one. And some of them, there are this left character, which is means metallic character, right?
Yes. Can you identify, give me the numbers in the first row and in the second row?
No, at this moment I don't know. I can't do that.
No, the name of the elements. In which characters did you identify?
Okay. Well, let's say, for example, in the bottom one to the left, and also in the first one, first one in the top, first one in the bottom line, and then I can see the last one on the first row, and then let me check. Probably this one, the third one at the bottom, but I'm not quite sure about that one.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, you got those two right. Now I'm going to reveal, because I cheated a little bit, because I like to have fun when I'm teaching. So here we have the pairs. Okay, I intendedly chose 4 pairs of different symbols, different Chinese characters, and they share what in Chinese is called a radical or a root. The Chinese system is organized in small chunks of radicals that can help you build new characters. In this case, we have this radical that is 吃, which means gas. One of the meanings is gas. In this one, this radical is 是, and it means solid or rock. This one, as you said before, is tin, and it's a symbol for gold or metal. here we have shui, and as Chin, I forgot to add the complete one, but here we have two ways to represent shui, which means water or liquid in this case, okay? So you can see it here in xiu, which is a symbol for bromine, that you have the water or the liquid characteristic in this element. And here, this one is for Kong, which is mercury, which is also liquid. It's also a metal, but in this case, they chose to use this as a main characteristics, as it is a liquid. So here, in this case, we have Ting, which is hydrogen, and this one is Liu, which is chlorine. This one is Dian, which is for iodine, which is solid. And you have Liu, which is for sulfur. This one is Na, which is sodium. And this one is a very old one, which is Tie, which is iron. So when we are learning or when we are teaching chemistry, we are asking our students to go from a very concrete way of thinking to a more abstract way of thinking. One way to help them go through it is to prepare small activities that will help them work with this transition. They can touch, they can identify elements, and little by little, they can connect the dots and start working in a more symbolic way. Why did I choose Chinese? First of all, because I'm a Chinese learner. My Chinese is not good at all at this point, but I'm trying to. And I find very important that teachers are motivated as well as students when teaching something. So for teachers, we tend to teach the same content over and over again throughout the years, and that becomes very boring for us. And also, yes, and also this diminish the quality that we use in our classes. If we are trying to use different aspects, like in this case, linguistics and also multicultural information, we are making chemistry not something that you teach using formula, but you are also using things from different sciences or different subjects that the kids also take in school. There are some things that we have to consider in order to understand why Chinese symbols are the way they are for the names, not the symbols, because the symbols, they use the same ones, okay? They use H for hydrogen, they use the same symbols all around the world, as we know, but in the names, we can get extra information that we don't get in the Western names, okay? We need to understand how Chinese characters or Hanzi are conceived. We have pictograms that represent the concept, okay, or the object. In this case, Zhen, it's a person. And if you use a little bit of your imagination, you can see a walking person in the character, okay? In the case of ideograms, they represent abstract concepts. San gives the idea of 3. For the periodic table, they decided to go with the semantic phonetic compounds that use one of the radicals or roots that gives a property, it gives meaning to the character, and the other one is the one providing you with the phonetics for that character. In this case, the character is Li, which is lithium. And as we all know, lithium is a metal, okay? In the case of associative compounds, they use different characters to combine, and both of the characters help to build this the meaning. In this case, Zhen and Tu make Suo, two people sitting on the ground, and the character means to sit. Okay, that's the way a basic knowledge on Chinese for those who are not related or they are not familiar with Chinese. How did the Western knowledge of chemical elements got into China? Everything started after the Opium Wars with medicine people, and also with they use medicine and that knowledge also to share Christianity. So there were missionaries that were carrying all this knowledge of the Western medicine in contrast to the Chinese medicine. And that's how, at the late period, at the ending of the Qin dynasty, this knowledge on elements entered China. There were several attempts to produce the names. The first one was Benjamin Hobson in 1855, and he was the one assigning the new names for oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and carbon in Chinese. And what he did was reflect the properties of the elements and translate it into a two-character name. Later on, W.A.P. Martin and his colleagues translated or added to that list 30 elements. The ones that were kept from since 1855 were the ancient name for copper, gold, silver, iron, lead, mercury, and sulfur. They already existed in Chinese, in the Chinese language, so they kept it as a part of the names. Later on, John Fryer and Xu Shou, they decided, they were the first one to put in writing the rules that you have to follow in order to create a name. This is very important because when you change a language, you also change the understanding of the concepts. You change the grammar, you change the way that people think in a culture. So it's very important that when you make translations, you don't fall into the easiest way, which is the transliteration of the whole word. In Chinese, it's very hard to do so because they translate syllable by syllable. So at the end of it, you had a huge name that meant nothing but sound like the Western word. So that method was not going to be useful, especially if we think that they needed to add that in a table. So how long should a periodic table be if you're going to transliterate all the names? Rutherfordium, it will take probably 4 characters in Chinese to translate that name. So in this case, they decided that if an ancient name was good enough, if everyone knows that tin is gold, okay, we are going to keep that name. That's how they kept the ancient names. Then also they decided that, as I mentioned before, they were not going to transliterate every European term to Chinese. Also, they decided to keep Benjamin Hobson's translation, but they combined the 2 characters and make it to 1. In that process, sometimes in order to have an understandable character, because if you know Chinese, there are some characters that have so many strokes that it's very hard to understand them or to write them down. They decided to combine and sometimes change the original character and used an homophone. It's an homophone, so but they know where the name came from. Okay, that's a case of oxygen. And also they decided that there's going to be only one syllable, one character for each element. For some of them, they use the first syllable in English or in French or in German, because sometimes they translate it from German, and they added the radical indicated the property of the element. So if it's a gas, you are going to have the T character. If it's solid, you're going to have the Sh. If it's liquid, you're going to have Shui. And if it's a metal, you're going to have the Tin character added to the left. Okay. So if we contrast that way of naming and our way of naming, they have less categories than we do. Here, if someone take the challenge and do the math, it's not going to add up to 118 elements, because some elements are part of more than one way of naming. We had the pre-chemical names that were accepted widely, and then we had different names referring to a different thing depending on the time that they were discovered. So that's why we have.
Sorry to interrupt. You have 10 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is how if we want to know something else about the element and we studied the names in English or in Spanish, in our case, you also need to know some Latin, some Greek, some French, and some German in some cases. So the Chinese system provides you a tool to teach some properties of the elements without requiring further knowledge on more than one language, more than two, because your native language still counts. And what I found very interesting while teaching is to make comparisons between our native language here, Spanish, and the language of chemistry. Because when we understand chemistry as a language, we can make analogies between words and sentences and text and phrases. And also it gives us the perspective of what we are asking of our students. Because when you're teaching chemistry for a long time, you tend to forget all the things that are involved for starters, for beginners, to learn chemistry. You have to have your mathematics at point. You have to know how to combine symbols to make sense, to represent a formula, and link that to a concept, maybe to relate it to the angles, the structure, the chemical properties, the physical properties. We ask kids to also understand graphics that are not part of their daily life. So at some point, it's a lot, and sometimes the curriculum is organized in a very heavy way. That's why I'm trying to find a way to introduce them to the symbolic language by playing games and trying to help them find patterns. If we help them to find patterns, we train them to find patterns, they can project that and use that to solve new problems. This is one of the things we are going to keep on working with the framework of different pedagogies, with different theories, one of them being Ausubel's meaningful learning. This is a very old chart, but it helps synthesize what our brain does when we first learn something and how we move it to the long-term memory and how can we access to that information that it's in the long-term memory. We need to create, first we need to compare the information to what we previously know and make categories and load that new information into some categories. Then the hooks that we create, in this case, what I'm proposing is to use the symbols, to use the Chinese characters as a hook to connect with the chemical symbol and also with some physical properties. Some of the symbols also have, like bromine, it also have another property, which is the smell. In the Chinese name, the other character means that it's smelly. So in some cases, we can also play with other qualities beside the physical state of the element. And then these hooks will help us to access that information when we are questioned and to produce the answers that we want the kids to produce. So to end this presentation, I would like to sum up what I'm thinking when preparing this type of activities for my students. I want them to be able to identify common elements. In this case, they're radicals or roots, and organize information into categories. This is like a previous step, and then we can move on to help them analyze why the periodic table is organized in groups or periods, or what the elements have in common. It also helps, as I mentioned before, to provide some physical information, some information about the physical state of the elements. It helps creating a hook to call the information back when we need to access that information. It also acknowledges the thing that students are immersed in an anime and manga world nowadays. They are familiar with the symbols, more to Japanese kanji than to Chinese hanzi, but they are similar. And it also presents a challenge. You need to change your mindset, and also gives the idea that this is something that I will work on in a different line, but how a multilingual brain presents several cognitive advantages over a non-bilingual or no multilingual brain. This is something that it attracts me a lot. And of course, just for the fun of it, because I need to be playful when teaching, to enjoy myself as well as the kids. I will leave you with this artist quote: "Language, philosophy, and science are interwoven into the design of words, which are manipulated to create surprising illusions." I believe that when we dive in the world of linguistics in all their aspects, they lead us to an amazing world. Sometimes we reach the point of no return and we become completely crazy, but it's a path worth taking when analyzing things, and when we want to look things as a whole, not as separate parts of everything. We need to think of knowledge as an holistic thing, and not isolated items that have no connection at all.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you at all.
Thank you, Andrea. That was very interesting. We don't have very much time for questions unless we go a little bit into the break, so I'll ask people to raise their hands if they have questions. But please keep them brief because we should let people go to the break as well.
I cannot see how to share. I cannot unshare.
You can't unshare. You're stuck. Alfonso has a question. Alfonso.
Yes.
Very quick comment. Congratulations. Ni hao. The already complex network of chemistry. Thank you very much.
I wasn't able to listen. It was cracking all the time.
It was very unclear, your reception.
Yes.
Can you repeat it again?
Type it on the chat?
Or put it in the chat, yeah.
Yes.
Well, later on I'll contact you. That's all. I mean, thank you.
Okay, okay.
Okay, Eric.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. How about Japanese characters? Is it a similar story about how they developed?
Japanese characters use the kanji, and kanji are derived from the traditional Chinese.
Okay.
I haven't made the comparison yet between Chinese, Japanese, but I also want to do it between Chinese, Japanese, and Korean because they share history, and ancient Japanese shared the Hansu, they call it kanji, and ancient Korean share Hancha, which are the same. Before before Mao's decision to change the characters, they were the same.
Okay. You should maybe collaborate with Yona because she knows all about that.
I cannot hear you. It sounds like a very high pitch.
The microphone doesn't work.
Does it work now?
Now it's good.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the ancient characters you mentioned are also used in Japanese as is. The metal is different, but anyway. Surprisingly or interestingly, in these letters are also in the Bible. I mean, these ancient elements are also, their names is in the Bible, what you call the Old Testament. And then Japanese combined is a katakana or kanji or both. So again, this is a long discussion, but I put in the chat my article about Roscoe and Japanese translation of some English chemistry and Hebrew. So please check this article online and maybe we can discuss further later. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I think what we'll do now is we'll have the 10-minute, the break until, for 15 minutes, we have a break, or just a little bit more than that, 16, 17 minutes. And then we'll resume again with the final invited speaker of today's session, and that will be Alfio. So Alfio, would you like maybe during the break, maybe you can share your screen and make sure the mechanism works.
Okay. You will have to bear with me because I will read his presentation.
That's fine. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let's
Yeah, so thank you, Andrea. That was very interesting. And of course, one is always curious about other scripts as well, such as, there are many, many different scripts in the Indian languages or in India and in the African languages as well. But that would take an awful lot of knowledge.
It's very interesting when you dive in the way that different cultures understand things, because in order to have suitable translations, you also need to know a lot about the culture, and that was very with cultures like Japan or China, which were close to the rest of the world for so long. It was not easy to understand either the culture or the language, because prior to 1990s, learning Chinese was not that easy, and not many people were able to go to China and stay and learn or make translations. Also for their ancient philosophy or traditional books like I Ching or Tao Te Ching, those kind of books, there are few people that were able to translate them, respecting their culture and not trying to make it similar to our culture or the Western culture. I believe that it's a lifetime research to understand how every single non-English, non-French, non-Latin speaking countries were able to translate those ideas into things that will make sense to them, as well as respecting the original term.
I'm sure that between us at this meeting, there are probably 20 different languages that people know. And of course, yes, translation is always very difficult and very sensitive.
It's interesting that one of the first Europeans to work with the I Ching, as far as I know, is Leibniz. And I don't remember the exact reference, but anyway, he was intrigued by the binary system, of course, and his whole universal algebra interest coincided with that. But his interest in chemistry, I remember reading back in graduate student days, in his opinion, Leibniz thought that the tongue was able to distinguish a variety of chemical properties much more sharply than anything else that existed at that time. And that whole interjection of the olfactory and taste, the sensual aspects of elements and substances is really wonderful and intriguing.
The monks in that would develop wine in France, they would go and taste the soil. They'd put it in their mouth and taste it in order to understand whether the soil was going to be good for growing grapes. It's nice.
Yeah, that's one of those wonderful things. It's kind of lacking more as we sort of overemphasize the theoretical and the conceptual. We have sort of drawn away from the sensual aspects. So it's wonderful to see in your presentation that it can be built into the periodic table, and it has that long history drawing back to concrete experience. So that's, and I'm sure the examples like the one that Michelle just brought up with the soil and Leibniz, and there are probably many more that could be collected. And in that connection, I put something in chat earlier, that recent book, which I'm waiting to read, called Smellosophy, does
we've lost you.
Importance of the olfactory channel to the conceptual, to the learning aspects of consciousness. So we're, it's coming up. It's coming up and blossoming, and look forward to more of that. Thank you.
So we still have 10 minutes, so don't panic, but it would be nice to see if the screen can be shared. Because you have been made into co-host, so you should be able to do it.
Yes, I was trying to recover all the information in the chat first, but yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. Let me check. Share.
The chat will stay. It's going to be the same chat for the next session anyways.
Oh.
So the information won't go away. So I think there we go.
Okay.
Yes. And just check that you can go full screen and you can go to the next slide. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Now we can do more fun stuff such as chatting. So.
Okay, wait, I need to. Since I normally put the people talking up in the upper side of the screen, then it collides with the commands, and then I cannot change things.
That's right. But also, I was thinking in your talk too about this, asking the students to spot similarities between the different symbols. This is what we do in mathematics, right? A lot of it is just pattern spotting, and if you've got the same on two different lines, then you just kind of ignore them, because it's exactly the same. And the idea about equality is that there's a difference between the two sides normally, and then you show that they're actually the same. So all of that, it's a very mathematical skill to do the pattern spotting, and that of course is related to language and also to this abstract thinking that you were talking about at the very end.
Yes, I am undergoing a teacher training course to become an English teacher, and because of that, I'm exposed to a lot of linguistics theories and a lot of pedagogy. That's why I think it's very important that at some point we reconnect with some theories and rethink the activities that we propose to our students, and try to understand. Because nowadays, I don't know what is going on in the rest of the world, but here in Argentina, we are having a very heterogeneous type of classrooms. So we have kids that have special needs in terms of cognitive activities or process, and we have been experiencing a long time economic crisis here, especially in education. So there are some kids that were out of school for more than the 2 years that the pandemic was going on. So there are some skills that they haven't had practice when they were supposed to. So they reach high school and we find out that they cannot read properly, that they don't understand what you are asking them to do. They read, but they do not comprehend. So in these cases, it's good to remember the stages from Piaget's theory. So try to, okay, this is what we have here. We can keep on complaining and passing on the guilt to the previous teacher, or we can do something about it. And if we, kids are also, they have short-term attention. They get distracted a lot. So you need to do things that can keep them connected to your class. So it's not that everything has to be fun. It's not that you're not going to sit down and read a text and underline ideas, but you have to provide some activities that can help them associate learning chemistry with having fun, instead of, oh no, it's chemistry class again. So this is the feeling that I want to avoid in my students. And I think that adding what I like to the equation helped me also prepare the classes in a better way.
Yeah, of course, because you're excited about it yourself and you find it inspiring yourself, and then you bring all that energy to the class, and then
Exactly.
the students feel that, you know, they know that. I mean, I'm always amazed, because we say that the students have a shorter attention span, but they'll do video games for hours on end. They're doing the same activity for hours, and sometimes they'll miss sleep. So,
Yeah.
so it's a kind of brain state that they get into, I think. So, and which is not something that you find in the classroom, because we can't bling things around that fast for them.
Yes. Yes. It's also I'm starting to use a lot of digital activities. There are a lot of platforms that help you kind of create a video game or a game that they can play online, and try to add to the class whatever works, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. You need to keep on learning new things, new abilities, especially with all this computer science developing and everything getting old by the minute. But at least you have to try, because they are going to live in a very different world. And if they don't start practicing, we are doing no service to them. We need to provide some safe space for them to connect with that, and also to learn boundaries, to learn limits. So you are not able to be connected 24/7 to something. It's not healthy. Your brain is going to blow up. So you need also to do something with your hands, and you also need to produce something instead of always receiving. So there are many aspects that we need to consider. It's a very nice challenge to be a teacher nowadays. It doesn't pay off in money, but it pays off in the experience, and also as you said, the feedback that we get from the students when you get an emotional connection to.
Keith put up the word flow on his screen. I'm just wondering why. What did you mean by this?
Well, you refer to a certain brain state, and technically that's called flow, which is the state where you're so engaged in something that you don't really feel the passage of time. And I mean, it isn't unknown in classrooms, but it's not common in most classrooms most of the time. But you can get children so engaged in activities that when the bell goes, they say, oh, it can't be time for break already. You know, not enough, but it does happen.
Yeah.
That's when you know that your class was good.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, would you like? ¿Por qué te hablo en español? A vos te tengo que hablar en español. Okay. All right, whenever you... No, but I don't need to be seen. It's... I just need to be heard. Okay, but let's share the screen.
I don't want to start early, just because there might be one or two people coming just for the talk, you see. So
we'll wait.
we might all be here, so we'll just wait another 2 minutes.
I think we are anxious, as usual.
As everyone is always. That's normal. A little bit of that, you know, that spicy edge.
Yes.
Tengo que decir que mi inglés no es muy bueno.
You can if you want. Or we can for next time we can try to do a lip sync. So you move your
or do hand signals.
Yes, no, I promise him that whenever we find time, I need to train him and help him develop his English, because
or we should all learn Spanish properly. I wish I could learn it properly. I just don't have the time.
It's harder than English. It's harder than English.
No. I'm sure it's not harder.
Yeah, I think because he has so many. I'm talking about you, and you're here. I'm sorry, but
no problem.
But he has so many deep ideas that I'm not able to make justice to his ideas. I can only read, but I think that when he gains the tool, it will be no limits for you. He's going to be able to go further.
Okay, I suggest that we begin. So now we have Alfio Zambon, who is going to be actually presented by Andrea, who we just heard. So she's going to read out the paper, and the paper is about the dual nature of the chemical element concept, a conceptual bridge inspired by Kantian philosophy. And Alfio and Andrea are both from the National University of Patagonia in San Juan Bosco. So it's very nice to hear people from exotic Patagonia.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
I'll interrupt when you've got 10 minutes left, just so you know.
Okay, so today's presentation is going to be about the dual nature of the chemical element concept, a conceptual bridge inspired by Kantian philosophy. I'd like to start by saying that the following is a work in progress, and by quoting Jorge Luis Borges as a trigger. If space is infinite, we are in no particular point in space. If time is infinite, we are in no particular point in time. This is extracted from the Book of Sun. This presentation deals with space, time, and infinity, starting from the distinction of Paneth in 1931 between the chemical elements understood in a dual way, as basic substances and simple substances. It is possible to conjecture that between these two manifestations, it can be postulated that there is a conceptual bridge, which in general terms is based on the perception of the element in space and time as a spectrum of infinite manifestations between two extreme forms, the chemical element perceived in space abstracted from time, and the chemical element perceived in time abstracted from space. With the great advance of quantum physics at the beginning of the 20th century, the atomic theory was consolidated in the field of chemistry, beginning to assimilate the concept of element to that of atom. However, after the discovery of isotopes by Soddy in 1913, the elements seemed to multiply, and the doubt about whether or not they were new elements unleashed the so-called crisis of the periodic table. It is in the context of this crisis that Friedrich Paneth takes up the dual nature of the element concept, differentiating between elements as simple substances according to their phenomenological manifestations, and elements considered in an abstract sense as basic substances, to which he gave them as their only property, instead of their atomic weight, as Mendeleev proposed, their atomic number, in accordance with the new quantum mechanics. For Paneth, it is not about two descriptions of the same entity, the product of an epistemic limitation to be overcome in the future by better knowledge of it. According to the author, the concept of chemical element presents in itself a double nature. I will use two quotes from Paneth to help me develop these ideas. Probably no other example shows more strikingly that the simplest and most familiar scientific laws are only valid under the implied or explicit assumption of a transcendental world. And the atomic theory can, it is true, contribute enormously to, indeed, may be necessary for, visualizing how the basic substances persist in simple substances and compounds, but the concept of basic substance as such does not in itself contain any idea of atomism. Space and time as forms of perception. Kant, to explain how appearances arise, postulated an original conception of space and time, not as properties of things, but as a priori structures that allow us to configure the world. In this way, space and time are not properties inherent to the world itself, but to our way of perceiving the world. From these forms of perceptions, the subject can place the objects outside of himself and form a coherent image of them. But for perceptions to give rise to knowledge, other transcendental conditions are necessary a priori. The categories are pure forms of understanding. Knowledge, for Kant, is a result of a special conjunction of experience and reason. The subject requires the data of the senses in space and time to be able to build their intuitions, and of the transcendental categories to conform the knowledge of reality. In this work, I will use the Kantian philosophy as inspiring, and I do not seek to delve into particular aspects, nor in the discussions about the various interpretations in this regard. The forms of sensibility, space and time, are a priori conditions to representations. To think on representation, the understanding requires categories. Categories are a priori conditions to think the objects. Categories are divided into 4 groups: quantity, quality, modality, and relation. Proposal for a conceptual bridge. In this work, I will propose a conceptual bridge between the elements as basic substances and the elements as simple substances inspired by the Kantian philosophy. This bridge consists of considering the elements as a phenomenon that develops in time and space, and refers to a spectrum of infinite ways of perceiving chemical phenomena between 2 extreme forms. That is, the change manifested in time and abstracted from space, and geometric relationships manifested in space and abstracted from time. This slide shows a graphic representation of the conceptual bridge mentioned before. The colors of the bridge were intendedly selected as an analogy of spectrum. The colorful background of the simple substance represents the access through perception and the analysis framed by the categories a priori to the properties of the element, whereas the dark background of the basic substance represents the lack of properties directly accessible to our perception. The first scenario corresponds to the mechanical element. The second scenario corresponds to the geometric element, GE. MEs are ontologically material entities. They can react with each other, forming a transition state to produce material compounds. The transition state forms a temporary barrier that is clearly defines a before and an after. GEs are ontologically formal entities that, through geometric relationships, interact with a formal entity called interaction node and another GE. The interaction node is a formal structure which has all the information inherent to the reaction potentialities. In other words, it constitutes a during. Along with GE, an interaction node represents reaction patterns abstracted from time, which can be described by interaction diagrams. According to the proposal of this work, the atomic number can be understood as the number of protons in the case of the ME, and also as an order number without material reference for the GE coinciding in the numerical value, but not in the conceptual nature. In short, ME occurs in time abstracted from space. It has an atomic molecular nature. In its unit of analysis is the molecular structure, and the idea of atomic number is a traditional one, while GE occurs in space, abstracted from time. It has a formal nature. Its unit of analysis is a chemical reaction in a geometric sense, and its atomic number is ordinal. Both ways of perceiving the chemical element are compatible and complementary, and constitute the way in which we can decipher the information concentrated in the basic substance, which, as knowing subjects, we cannot access directly. Prospects and possible projections. In the following slides, I would like to share some topics I'm working on without conclusive results yet. In general lines, I seek to relate the idea of geometric element with some previous works on reactivity and periodic table. Representation of reactivity. To represent the reactivity of the elements understood in a geometric sense, abstracted from time, showing the network of interactions in the context of a reaction without appealing to the idea of causation and the temporal sequence that it entails. I use the strategy in which the interacting substances are represented by numbers, which make up points in a system consisting on concentric circle diagrams. The central idea is to order the substances that are represented in this way in a different order from the one in which they naturally appear in the reaction, according to a timeless parameter. In this way, the idea of sequential appearance of interacting substances is abandoned. The proposed model, which I call the interaction diagram, consists of 4 concentric circles which represent from the outside in the reaction medium in blue, the reacting entities in green, the reaction intermediates in yellow, and the reaction nodes in red. In this way, it is possible to represent the reactivity of the elements and the compounds in a geometric sense. On the right part of the slide, I show as an example the representation of the oxidation of bromine acid. At the beginning of the current century, Eric Serry reformulated the concept of triad, using the atomic number instead of the atomic weight for its definition. In this way, the triad resulted from integers. Also, the author suggested the use of atomic number triads as a possible secondary criterion, based on the fact that atomic number is the only essential property of chemical elements if they are considered as basic substances and not simple substances. In 2018, I proposed a representation of the periodic system where the primary criterion is given, as is usual in current tables, by the increasing order of the atomic numbers, and the secondary criterion is established by the formation of triads of atomic numbers in a logic of generation of triads, in order to cover all the known elements and some hypothetical ones. The table starts at element 0 and ends at 171. Although the proposed table is based on triads of atomic numbers in a geometric sense, the fundamental relationships in the architecture of the table is given by the trees of periodicity, symmetrical structures of interrelated elements by means of triads, which contain 20 elements each and are proposed as an alternative to traditional groups. In periodicity trees, main in yellow and secondary orange, and internal branches of the main and secondary in green are presented. The branches correspond to the groups in the standard periodic table. The table does not require the use of electron configurations and does not employ quantum numbers or any other quantum considerations. There are 9 periodicity trees, 8 with similar symmetry and 1 central. Among the 8 with similar symmetry, there are 4 pairs of elements from 68 to 100 and to 71 to 103 that are part of 2 trees. These elements would have a structural function as well as being part, in some cases, of the chemical periodicity. One of the most discussed points about the periodic table consists on the position of the elements that are below scandium and yttrium. Being the postulated options, lanthanum and actinium, or lutetium and lawrencium, in this proposal, the two pairs are below scandium and yttrium. Tree 3 is the frontier tree of a symmetry change in the secondary branches. Therefore, I think the problem should be associated with group 4, since below titanium and zirconium, and due to their chemical properties, both hafnium and rutherfordium, as well as cerium and thorium, could be positioned. According to this proposal, any table in the plane is a partial manifestation of a more complex relationship and necessarily limited and incomplete. It could be an analogous case to the problem of reflecting the continents of the spherical Earth in a projection in the plane. Inconsistencies, distortions, and incomplete relationships are necessarily produced. The choice between one table or another is mainly for pragmatic reasons. Final considerations. In this work, I propose that between the notions of the elements understood as basic substance and simple substance postulated by Paneth, it is possible to think of a conceptual bridge made up of infinite ways of perceiving the elements between two extreme forms. Elements perceived in time abstracted from space, and elements perceived in space abstracted from time. In the first case, we have the mechanical element, and in the second, the geometric element. It is important to highlight that these two forms are not opposite, but compatible and complementary. They allow to manifest different aspects of the chemical elements or the same aspect from a different perspective. In this work, I also propose that the reactivity of the geometric elements can be represented by means of interaction diagrams and their relationship with other elements by means of closed structures called periodicity trees, which occur in space. And I present a projection in the plane of those structures. Finally, it is important to highlight that this work is at an initial level of development. I would like to conclude with a quote from Jorge Luis Borges. And yet, those who picture the world as unlimited forget that the number of possible books is not. I will be bold enough to suggest this solution to the ancient problem. The library is unlimited, but periodic. If an internal traveler should journey in any direction, he could find after untold centuries that the same volumes are repeated in the same disorder, which repeated becomes order, the order. My solitude is cheered by that elegant hope. Jorge Luis Borges, extracted from the Library of Babel. Finally, thank you all for your attention, and comments and questions are welcome, but please do it slowly so I can translate.
Thank you very much for actually, I didn't remind you, and we have 15 minutes for questions. So there's lots of clapping going on. So who would like to begin asking a question?
Could I ask a question?
Farzad, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I understand space abstracted from time, and that makes sense in terms of basic substance to me. But I don't understand why simple substance would be time abstracted from space, because with the mechanical aspect that occurs in time, which I understand, reaction, process, and all of that, I can't imagine that without space being involved. So I don't understand why time abstracted from space is a necessary part. If you could explain that more, I'd appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Si es necesario el espacio abstraído del tiempo, lo que pregunta.
No, que entiende uno de los extremos, pero no el del tiempo abstraído del espacio. Can I ask you again, Farzad, the one that you were talking about was?
The one that I would like more explanation is time abstracted from space as a description of the mechanical
tiempo abstraído del espacio, digamos, sería el elemento mecánico. La idea sería tomar como una simetría, como una disociación del espacio-tiempo, como formas de percepción. De manera que en los dos casos se deja como constante la otra variable. Eso es en la forma de percepción para luego construir el objeto de elemento. Digamos, hay una especie...
Porque es necesario tener el otro extremo en el espectro.
No sería necesario, sino sería necesario como propuesta para la síntesis. Yo creo que clarificaría de esa manera, planteándolo como los extremos.
O sea que es necesario para poder trabajar después el espectro.
No, inicialmente se trabajó el espectro, digamos. Es necesario, digamos, es una vía alternativa para intentar la comprensión.
Okay, I'll try to be as faithful as I can to the translation. But in order to have a perception, you need both sides to work on the concepts. Space abstracted from time and time abstracted from space. Since this work is also under development, they are different aspects that need to be developed in depth. And also I think that the most developed idea right now is the geometric element. This is the one that he's working on with all the...
Es una forma de aproximarnos que está en desarrollo, ¿no? Es una alternativa.
Yes, it's in development, under development right now. So, and he's focusing on the geometric element right now.
Okay, good. Quick follow-up then.
Yeah.
Are the two, time abstracted from space, space abstracted from time, coincident so that you would have both operative at the same, together always? Okay. Or are they...
Sí. De hecho, por ejemplo, la interpretación de la mecánica cuántica de Copenhague sería en el espacio y en el tiempo simultáneamente.
Okay, yes. And when they exist, he's referring to the Copenhagen's quantum mechanics, that they have both existing at the same time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to follow up on that, in some more radical physics approaches, we sometimes change the number of spatial dimensions or the number of temporal dimensions. So you might even have two temporal dimensions. I don't know if that is an interesting suggestion for you or not.
Ella está diciendo que puede haber más de una dimensión del tiempo, o sea que el tiempo puede tener más de una dimensión, pueden ser dos dimensiones
lo que pasa es que yo tomo el tiempo como forma de percepción en el sentido kantiano.
Okay.
Y además esto está fuertemente influido por la lectura de una década de Borges.
Yes. Okay. So he is only using one time dimension because he's based on the Kantian perception, the Kantian perception, and also because these ideas are highly influenced by years of reading Borges. So yes, we almost had a quarrel because I wasn't using a quote from Borges in my own work. So yes, this is the light, his beacon.
Very good, thank you. Eric.
Hi, thank you very much, Alfio and Andrea. I have a question. There was mention was made of the group 3 question when you showed the slide with many different triads. Can you please explain that? What was the idea that this could resolve the group 3 question, or was it saying that they were both equally correct according to this view? I missed the point, I'm afraid.
Ok, quiere saber cómo esta propuesta puede resolver lo del árbol 3.
Bueno, la idea no sería tanto resolver, sino plantear una alternativa.
Okay.
La idea que yo estoy trabajando ahora, de la que no tengo resultados concluyentes, es que más que una tabla hablamos de un espacio periódico. En el espacio periódico no existirían propiedades lineales, sino laterales. Si quieren...
Okay, so this proposal will not solve it, but pose an alternative of thinking the table not as in 2D, but in the space, and this means that they are not linear properties,
laterales y espaciales,
but they are spatial and lateral, because it's in a 3D.
Y que entre el grupo 3 y el grupo 4 hay un cambio de simetría estructural. En ese cambio de simetría...
Okay, between 3.3 and 3.4, there's a change in symmetry.
En los árboles, la simetría estructural en los árboles.
The structural symmetry in the trees,
los
between
árboles
the trees.
Frontera, existiría una división más difusa en ese sentido.
Okay, and between different frontier trees, there would be a non-conclusive distinction or blurry distinction. Would you like to see the slide again?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
If possible.
Sure.
Acá volvemos y vamos.
Here.
Y aquí tenemos el árbol 3.
Okay, there's 3.3 and that's 3.4.
Acá se observa, por ejemplo, la línea principal, que serían los grupos de la tabla periódica, son siempre laterales, a la izquierda de un lado y a la derecha otro. Y la línea secundaria, que son los grupos B, están hacia el lado contrario y acá hacia el interior. Por lo tanto, entre acá y acá hay un cambio de simetría. Ese cambio de simetría es el que hace que las líneas internas con las laterales se conecten con las otras.
Okay, what he's saying is that you have the primary branch here on the left in this tree, and on the other side is like a reflection, like a mirror reflection. But when you take a look at 3.3 and 3.4, this is reversed. And this change in symmetry is what makes the connections, the lateral connections that he is talking about. So we need to see this more in a 3D way than in a 2D projection to be able to see the geometric.
Es una idea que está en desarrollo.
But again, it's under development. So.
Y la idea es no pensar en tablas lineales, sino en espacios tridimensionales.
Okay.
Por eso la analogía con los continentes y los planos.
Okay. The idea of comparing or using the analogy of the continents and how they are misrepresented when we use the plane is the one that he's projecting here, because in the plane you need to think of this in a spatial distribution instead of in a plane, because this helps to understand the spatial interactions or the spatial relationship between the elements of different frontier trees.
Exactamente. Okay? Igualmente esta es una aproximación todavía.
Okay, so we are not there yet. It's an approximation. It's a
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Safia.
Yes, I have a question, and I actually want to understand whether I have understood him correctly. First, are both the levels actually transcendental? I mean, the space without time and time without space, are they both transcendental, or which one of them is transcendental? And a second question is there any epistemological difference, asymmetry between the two levels, between basic substance and simple substance, or there isn't?
We will answer the first question first, and then I will ask you to repeat the second one.
Okay.
Okay. ¿Quieres saber si los dos extremos son trascendentales?
En el sentido estrictamente kantiano, digamos acá, hago una interpretación particular de Kant. Por eso no es kantiano, sino inspirado en Kant. Digamos, intento, digamos, las formas de percepción sí son trascendentales. Lo que acá agrego es una disociación en el espacio y el tiempo que no está en Kant. Entonces es digamos, una inspiración kantiana, pero no es estrictamente trascendental en el sentido kantiano.
Okay. If you analyze this strictly using Kantian perception, forms of perception, it's not exactly Kantian, but it's inspired by Kantian perception. So in this case, for this proposal, they are both relevant, but they are not, they are derived from Kantian perceptions, but not exactly Kantian. I don't know if that answers your question.
So they are not transcendental. None of them is transcendental.
They are transcendental to this work, but this is still in progress. So in order to have other applications or to apply, to apply this to other topics, everything is under development. So once this work moves forward, we may be able to discover where it can be or which questions it can solve later on.
So both are transcendental or just one?
Both are, las dos son trascendentales, pero...
Sí, para mí sí.
According to him, yes. Not for Kant, but for him.
But then how are they actually at the same time phenomenal as well?
¿Cómo están las dos al mismo tiempo? ¿Existen al mismo tiempo o no existen en realidad alternativas?
No, lo que yo planteo es justamente en el espacio de la percepción, en el sujeto como
una que es
docente.
constante y la otra.
Claro, uno puede pensar en un caso y luego pensar en el otro, pero el tiempo externo no tendría nada que ver con el tiempo interno.
Okay, so this is related to internal time and external time. External time can be abstracted here, and you can think of one of the extreme forms and then think of the other and do it separately, referring to an internal time. The external time, which I think you're talking about when you say if they exist at the same time, that time that you're referring to would be the external time. And it has nothing to do with thinking these two extreme forms. Like that, okay. Don't kill me, I'm just the messenger.
And my second question was, is there any epistemological asymmetry between the two types of substances, or they are at the same epistemological level?
Epistemology, I cannot understand the other word, sorry.
Is there epistemological difference between the both?
Difference. Okay. ¿Hay una diferencia epistemológica entre los dos elementos?
Sí, o sea, en un caso se desarrolla en el espacio, la reactividad se desarrolla en el espacio, y en otro caso se desarrolla en el tiempo. Lo mismo que la permanencia, digamos. En un caso hay una noción distinta de permanencia y cambio.
There's a difference between them, and it's related to the permanence in change. So for one of them, it's set in space, and for the other one is set in time.
La idea es esa, que la estoy trabajando ahora. Digamos, es una disociación, pero como la disociación no puede ser total, sí puede ser disociado en cuanto a la percepción y a la construcción del objeto de conocimiento luego de eso.
O sea que dejas para el análisis, dejas uno fijo.
Claro.
Y el otro.
Digamos, y el otro se desarrolla.
Y el otro. Okay. So he's developing that, and to do so, one of the parameters must remain stable or fixated, and the other one is the one that is developed.
But how would we determine which one remains stable?
¿Cómo determinamos cuál es el que queda estable?
Digamos,
lo definís a priori.
Lo defino a priori, digamos, justamente.
Okay.
En un caso yo percibo percibo en el espacio y desarrollo el objeto de conocimiento en el espacio. En el otro caso percibo en el tiempo y desarrollo el objeto de conocimiento en el tiempo.
Okay, that is defined a priori. You decide first which one is going to be fixated and develop
objeto de conocimiento.
The knowledge object or the object of knowledge later.
But isn't it that for Paneth, it was actually the basic substance was basic and permanent in a sense, isn't it?
Está preguntando por lo de Paneth. Si para Paneth no era permanente el objeto.
Bueno, Paneth también, sí, digamos, era de una fuerte inspiración kantiana. Lo que yo trato es de reinterpretar a Paneth, pero manteniendo la idea de sustancia básica y sustancia simple. Pero también sería para Paneth, sí, es así, digamos. Pero yo veo esa propuesta en realidad no lo que quiso decir Paneth, sino lo que quiso explicar Paneth. Entonces...
okay, this work aims to reinterpret what Paneth wanted to say. Not what he's not questioning what he said, but he's reinterpreting the explanation of basic and simple substances.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I hope I answer at least one.
Puede ser muy difícil de entender porque estamos acostumbrados a pensar el cambio en el tiempo y no el cambio en el espacio.
Okay, this may sound difficult to understand because we are used to think about changes in space and not in time and not in space. That's it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll thank our speakers and we'll close the official meeting now. And thank everybody for having come, and I hope that this was fruitful and enjoyable. I'm sorry that Jerry wasn't here because I think he would have enjoyed all of the talks because he thinks about a mathematical conception of the periodic table. So I think he would have found it very fruitful, but he wasn't here, unfortunately. So thank you very much, all of you. And we have our last session tomorrow. And we'll leave the floor open now for people to speak. We had a very fruitful and interesting discussion yesterday for those who stayed. We went on for another hour and a half or something, chewing things out, and it was very good. So I do encourage you to stay and join the discussion and start discussion, provoke each other, and see where we go. So now the floor is open, free for all.
Okay, is there anything you want to say?
Mark, you've unmuted.
Yeah. I was going to say the thing that I see as being intermediate between the basic substance and the simple substance is actually the gas phase elements. So now, of course, some of the helium, neon, argon, etc. The gas, in many ways the basic substance, the gas phase substance, the simple substance is the same thing. But the thing that appears to unify the elements is to look at the elements in the gas phase. Some of the elements very easy to get into the gas phase, other elements very, very difficult. carbon, tungsten, etc. But it does seem that in the gas phase, the gas phase elements, they're very interesting because you can compare things like first ionization energy, and you can start to think about things like atomic radius. And this seems to be a very interesting sort of intermediate state. So I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Can you make that a bit clearer? What do you mean that the noble gases would represent this interesting, what, pivoting?
We have the idea. We have the idealized basic transcendental elements, and then we have the real, or the actual substance in the test tube, if you like. And I personally think the intermediate state between these are the elements in the gas phase. But these are the elements normalized, where you can actually make direct comparisons between the elements and measure such things as atomic radius and first ionization energy and electron affinity, and quite fundamental sort of structure and reactivity ideas.
Mm.
Mm.
Okay. Que no comprendo bien la pregunta.
Can you pose your question again, probably in a more simple way, so we can try to...
So if in the basic substance, the element only has atomic number and an associated symbol, and in the simple substance, we have the element in test tubes. We can actually model it, and I personally think the intermediate state is the elements in the gas phase. So and the elements that are naturally in the atomic gas phase state are the noble gases. All the other elements, we have to do some work on them, put energy in to form the gas phase element.
Well, except for oxygen, nitrogen, and
but that is not the gas phase atom.
Why not?
Because it's O2, CL2, Br2.
Porque serían intermedios, están dentro de nuestro pensamiento, o sea, dentro de nuestro... Están en el sujeto, y el puente está en el sujeto como percepción y como construcción del conocimiento. No sería en el sentido físico, sino en el sentido de objeto de conocimiento. Y en un caso tenemos objetos formales y en el otro caso objetos físicos. Esa diferenciación sería solamente en la simple sustancia.
All right. What Ajay is saying is that we are not talking here about physical substances, but the bridge, the spectrum, it's a perception within the subject. It's how we perceive and how we build knowledge.
Dentro del sujeto cognoscente.
Within the knowing subject.
Yes. Luego, como sustancia simple, puede ser gaseoso o sólido, eso viene después. Cómo el sujeto logra conocer.
Okay, so this conceptual bridge is trying to reflect how the subject understands and perceives and learns. And the physical stage of the elements, of the actual elements, it's something that goes further.
En los supuestos hay un caso en que el objeto es meramente formal y en el otro es totalmente físico.
¿En cuál es el físico? ¿En el mecánico?
En el mecánico, sí.
Okay, and the physical element is related to the mechanical state and the formal?
de forma, como un objeto geométrico,
Okay.
tal como Kant lo plantea en la crítica de la razón pura. Ahí sí tomo Kant. Tomo la geometría como construcción y la mecánica como construcción, pero aplicada al caso del elemento.
Okay, and the other extreme form, the geometrical form, it is deeply influenced by Kantian proposal.
En crítica de la razón pura.
I don't know the name of the book.
Cómo la geometría es una ciencia y cómo la mecánica es una ciencia. Pero aplico esos conceptos a la distinción de panes.
All right. So that distinction between simple and basic substance is influenced by Panev, but also applying the Kantian point of view or explanation of geometry.
Como ciencia geométrica, no
As
aplicada
a
a los elementos.
science, not applied to the elements.
Yes.
He is applying that framework to the elements, the analysis of the elements. So it's not that there is actually something physical or elements in the spectrum between the mechanical and the geometrical elements, but a way of understanding. The spectrum is about a way of understanding, of perceiving and understanding knowledge. Wow. This is like going to the gym. Or worse.
Can I say something, changing the subject, if I may, for a moment?
Yeah.
I'm probably going to miss most of tomorrow's meeting. I have to go to Las Vegas, of all places. Maximum temperature 103 or 4 tomorrow. I'm doing a radio interview with National Public Radio, so there. I'll try and catch some of the early part of the meeting before leaving, but I just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to especially to the organizers. But it's been really nice meeting. At first, I had doubts about the idea of a meeting lasting the whole week, but actually it's been rather nice to be able to get up early, in my case, in the morning and check in and see all these great talks. Please send me email if you have any more comments and keep in touch. And I suppose at some point we're going to have to put our heads together to decide where the next meeting is. I don't think there's been any talk of that in the committee yet. But so thank you, Michelle. And as I say, I probably won't catch much of the meeting tomorrow.
Well, we'll miss you tomorrow and have fun in Las Vegas. Don't gamble all your money away.
No, I will keep well away.
I'm sure the air conditioned in the casinos, Eric.
Yes, yes.
I'm sure there is.
Don't worry. Anyway,
they can afford it.
Of course, they have the slot machines in the airports, just in case you still have some money on the way out. They can get you one final time. Anyway.
Yeah, but you're not going to drive like Hunter Thompson then?
No. It's a 1 hour flight.
1 hour flight. Sure.
Fear and loathing and all that, yes.
Well, have fun in Las Vegas and do because you should be able to join the YouTube live streaming if nothing else, right? Even if you don't have, I don't know how it works, but as you know, there's the included group, and then there's also the YouTube
but they both require an internet connection.
Right.
I think if I can get it at the airport, which should be possible.
And probably not in the casinos, right?
Oh no. Going to the casino.
But Eric, did you get that that link to that paper I sent? The one momentum, basically imaging orbitals. And the paper is called Momentum Space Imaging of Sigma Orbitals for Chemical Analysis. And there's a rather remarkable line in here, where basically it says, and it gives the impression that whereas that the orbitals are routinely visualized using this technique of photoemission orbital tomography.
Okay. No,
and it actually, it just implies that it's absolutely routine now to visualize orbitals. Yeah,
could you explain what tomography is?
I'll put the link in the in the notes, and it's
3D scanning, 3D.
It just gives it says, it says here, this has spurred many successful efforts to image orbitals. Orbital imaging has also implied the investigation of chemical bonding, and this whole paper just gives the impression that it is now absolutely routine to image orbitals.
Who are the authors?
Well, it's called Hags, Yang, Egger. I put the link in the
Oh, good. Yeah, I see it now.
It's a technique I hadn't heard of before, but
yeah, that's what I wanted. And then there's a reference number 7 or something. I was just looking at it. Reference number 7 talks about tomography or whatever that is, but
yeah,
I don't know it.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
We'll all have to get tomographers together or something, or have a
yes.
or buy a tomographer online or something like that.
Yes,
see if Amazon sells them.
Yeah, so they got some lovely pictures, but I'm not sure. They might well be measuring electron densities, but whether I'm measuring orbitals, of course, is
yeah. Well, it's sometimes that word is used interchangeably. Sometimes that was part of the confusion in 1999 when those people claimed to have imaged orbitals. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I'm just looking in the references to see if there's any reference to that discussion, but it doesn't look like it. Oh, wait a minute. No. Yeah, well, actually, Eugen wrote a paper on this in which he seemed to think there was something in it.
Right.
Yeah, there was a paper called Orbitals, Something or Provocation. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Reality or Provocation or something of that form. Yeah, I've backed out of that particular discussion. It just got too technical.
Yeah.
And if they mean different things by the word orbital, then of course you don't know where you stand.
Yeah, the paper that you gave on the first day, I think, on bonding. How far are you on with this, and what you plan to do with it? I think it's a really important.
Well, apart from the critique from Keith Tabor, which I haven't completely cleared up yet, I thought we've been corresponding, and I think I've cleared it up. But anyway, that was the first and simplest attempt to explain why kinetic energy is important. I then moved on to the other. I just want to go more deeply into it. I want to try and get to the position where I can make some sort of judgment between the beta school, who are denying kinetic energy or the importance of it, and the kinetic energy school. And I believe it's, as I said, an important debate which philosophers of chemistry can maybe contribute something to. At least they shouldn't be ignoring it. And just, as I said in the lecture, be concerned with whether orbitals, in this case, bonding exists or not. So you may think this is an inconsistency because I did get involved in a debate about whether orbitals exist or not. But I think the reason for that, there are different cases. In the case of orbitals, mathematically, they don't exist. I was bringing this up yesterday to Michelle and asking her for her view, because it's a complex number. Whereas in the case of bonding, we don't have that way of making a more clear-cut conclusion. So to my mind, exploring whether bonds are real is pretty much a waste of time. And that's what's been done by a number of people in the philosophy of chemistry literature up to now. Most recently by Vanessa Seifert, who has been writing papers on this. She had a paper in Chemistry World, not a paper, a short article, in which she said, this is an important debate in the philosophy of chemistry. I don't think so. But the debate the chemists are having is important because it's getting at what bonds are actually like. Of course there's bonding. How could anyone deny there's bonding? That would be denying the existence of two or more
gravity
binding together. I mean, that would be absurd. But whether a bond is, I'll tell you why I think Robin Hendry is keen on real bonds. I think he's keen on real bonds because he's keen on structure. And the reason he's keen on structure is because he believes that structure cannot be recovered from quantum mechanics, which is true as things stand, because of this Born-Oppenheimer question. So if structure is not reducible to quantum mechanics, for Hendry, that means emergence is at play. So he's wanting to, if you like, justify the importance of structure. That's why he likes the idea of actual bonds existing in it. That's my take on it.
The analogy with gravity is an interesting one, because you might say, well, gravity doesn't exist. We now know gravity doesn't exist. There's just space-time geometry, and the idea of gravity is just a kind of epiphenomenon. But I mean, for most people, if you fall over and hit the ground, something's happened. We call it gravity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now to ask the question whether gravity exists would be like saying, well, does electromagnetism exist? And I mean, existence questions are the domain of metaphysics rather than physics, chemistry, but there is a thriving metaphysics industry, and if you go to their conferences, you understand almost nothing. At least I almost understand almost nothing. They're living out of the universe sometimes.
Some physicists don't like, I came across some that didn't like the notion of forces at all. And instead they really hung on to the notion of the curvature of space-time as a replacement, and they didn't want to talk about forces, which was really difficult for me conceptually. I found it very, very hard to wrap my head around that, because there's got to be something that's warping the space-time, and if it's not force, then what is it? What's going on? Is it just happening to be warped in this? I don't know. It was too confusing for me. But
it's mass that warps it. But they would argue they wouldn't call it a force. They just say that's mass, the effect of mass.
That's right.
Exactly. There's no such thing as electromagnetic force. There's just exchange of particles.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just language, isn't it? It's just a different description,
Yeah.
Yeah, as I saw something a couple of days ago, and it was saying, some physicists saying that when he started, it was what the universe is full of particles, and then it's full of fields, and now it's just full of information. And you know, you're just like, okay, right, you know, it's. Yeah,
it's actually now it's full of misinformation. That's the problem.
Yes. Yes.
And distractions.
Yeah, I would like to add something, is that maybe the issue of the reality of bonds has been relevant in the philosophy of chemistry recently, because we have at least two competing models that say different things about what a model is: valence bonds and molecular orbital models about bonding. So I think that is the reason why the metaphysical issue has been relevant for some philosophers of chemistry. This idea of having two models that are empirically equivalent, but conceptually describe different what a bond is, and is generally reduced to the issue of localization or delocalization of electrons in bonds. So maybe that's the reason why philosophers of chemistry are interested in what a bond is, if they took just these potential models. For me, maybe I will send you the paper, because my lecture precisely is about this thing.
Oh.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't want to.
But you will see it on the BSA Philosophy of Science Association, because I will improve the arguments we have been putting into this discussion. It's not about metaphysics. Actually, it's just about having competing models that are equivalent empirically, but conceptually completely different, or different descriptions about the bond. We are not taking the metaphysical question, because we understand that there are certain, I will say, superior models that were those that you were talking about. I'm not so well informed in these kinetic models, but I will try to introduce it to see what happens now. Doing this comparison between the potential energy models of bond, if I can call it now in this way, and the kinetic energy kind of. I will try to improve that for November, but for tomorrow it's just about valence bonds and molecular orbital descriptions.
It's not the potential energy or kinetic energy model. They both contribute. The question is which one contributes more. Right? So that's not a case of.
Okay, I got it now.
And
one or the other. Okay.
And also, as Eric was saying, it's a question of knowing what the bonds are, not whether or not they exist. So, and as you said, you're not tackling the metaphysical question of whether or not they exist, but what are they like? Because the different theories are going to describe them in different ways. Yeah.
When it comes to the two models,
exactly. So this is the issue of representation.
When it comes to the two models, say the valence bond or molecular orbital theory, they have been shown to be the same in the limit.
Yeah.
Right. So that's it. That's
you can make about the same.
There's no debate. They're the same.
But even if they're like mathematically equivalent, because you can change, or in the best approximation, you will have the same mathematical representation, right? The way you read those mathematical functions is completely different. No? You have like molecular orbitals in one side that are completely delocalized, and in the other hand, you have like hybridization and localization of electrons in bonds, classical way. No.
That's only
the problem is that they are equivalent. When you make all the approximations at the final, they tend to converge. But what they say about what bond is different, or the way I understand the situation. I'm not like into the more advanced computation of valence bonds and molecular orbital, but it looks like in the qualitative terms, the way they interpret those results is completely different. And I hope that this is true, because it's the base of my lecture. But as far as I know, that's the reason why there's had been so much discussion about the fact, is that they are mathematically equivalent, but conceptually different in the sense how they represent what a bond is, you know, or what electrons are doing in molecules, more like that, in that way.
Yeah. Okay, one last comment on this. If we read our ontology from our theories, and if our theories tell us that actually these two models are fundamentally the same, then I would conclude that they are the same. In other words, we can't draw ontological conclusions about what is actually the case by looking at the crude.
Yeah.
The crude model has, you know, hybridization, as you say, but as soon as you do a more detailed version of valence bonds, you've not got hybridization. You've got atomic orbitals that are being combined in a somewhat different way as they are being combined in molecular orbital theory. You're dealing even with the same objects, but combining them in a different way, which in the limit converges.
Yeah. Yeah, I will not try to ontologize those models. I know that there are approximations of quantum mechanics. That's not the idea. I'm just trying to tackle the issue of representation, how they represent, and how this issue of representation, it has to deal with different ways in which philosophers of general science are taking into account what these kind of models are. No? There are some that are advocates of incompatibility, others about different perspectives about the same phenomena. So we are still discussing things with Margaret Morrison, Roman Prick, this kind of people. So that's the idea, to try to advance some examples of multiple modeling in quantum chemistry in order to tackle this issue of multiple models and how we end with that. That's the idea, to explore. Because in chemistry, we don't have this idea of having big theories. We have such like multiple models for a lot of things. Acidity models are a kind of example of this. So we are trying to use examples of different models of the same phenomena in chemistry to see how we can contribute to this problem in philosophy of science.
Also,
the philosophy of models.
We should maybe distinguish between representation and existence, right? I'm talking about the existence.
Yes,
question.
exactly. Yeah.
It's not the same.
You're right.
You can represent it, and you're not necessarily claiming it is like this. You're saying, well, I've got students at secondary level, therefore I represent it like this. I've got second-year undergraduates, therefore I represent it like this. They're not claiming to be, you know, the final picture.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, that's.
I'm not putting forward this metaphysical conclusion at all. I'm just saying that in the way in which chemists have been modeling wave functions, there are some issues that can be interested for the philosophy of models in general, and see how much can we learn about this discussion.
Yeah.
So if you are not going to be here, maybe I will send you some draft I have or something like this. Maybe you can check it.
Juan Camilo, are you you're in the PSA session that Olympia organized? Is that correct? The one in November?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Give me a sec. There is a bus just coming in front of my flat. Okay, now.
Ben, I was just trying to remember if it was in fact you. And then we have a third person, I believe.
Yes, she's from Finland, I think. She's talking about I really don't remember some issue about the periodic table, but I don't remember exactly what was her argument about.
Okay, yeah. And unfortunately,
maybe some context of discovery.
Unfortunately, it's on the very first day, first thing in the morning of the conference.
Yes, you're right. I got it 2 days ago. It's the first day in the morning.
I've got to go. Eric, I'll see you soon.
See you.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got to go too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, see everyone. See everyone tomorrow. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark, for coming.
Bye. Thank you.
Love to see you.
And the last one, Eric, just the last one thing is that I sent the a few tools more for the spell issue. I sent, and there are just 2 more to go, and it's done. Okay.
Good. I just received a couple this morning or yesterday.
So,
yeah, thank you
okay,
very
awesome,
much
awesome.
for your work on that special issue.
No, don't worry. It's okay. It's okay. So if there is nothing more, see you tomorrow then.
Okay.
See you. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
Shall I close the session? Are there any objections? I turned it off because I was starting
Okay.
dinner.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so see you all tomorrow, and thank you for all of your stamina and courage and interesting ideas and input and good questions. Everyone has been keeping to timing really nicely, and the questions have been very good. The discussions have been very good, so I'm pleased. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I'll close the session now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.